or they have some other excuse for why they're begging. But these people literally had no choice. Society wasn't helping them. Clearly the religion wasn't helping them. This is something that really irritated Jesus, that the religious leaders weren't ministering to the people who were really in need. They were respecters of persons. He said they always wanted to be in the marketplace to be seen when it was time to pray. They were always at the banquets, but they weren't where the needs were. So people were begging. The church wasn't doing the ministry. So here Jesus shows them two things. One, he's willing to heal, and he heals on the Sabbath. And this man, as everybody knows, has been a beggar the whole time. So some say, is this not he? And some said, this is he. Others said, he's like him. He said, I am he. So some people are trying to explain away the miracle. Well, maybe he just looks like the guy who used to be a beggar. Maybe he really isn't a beggar. That's just somebody who looks like him. Everybody has a twin out there somewhere. This must be his twin. But he said, look, I'm the guy. I've been blind my whole life. I'm the one. Therefore they said to him, how were your eyes opened? He answered and said, a man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and I received sight. So he exercised a degree of faith. A man has been blind from birth. Some stranger comes along, puts clay on his eyes and says, go wash, and he does it. Because, he's been desperate his whole life, so he has no idea who this person is. He obviously has no familiarity with Jesus' ministry, because he says a man called Jesus. He doesn't know who he is, even though Jesus has been now in Jerusalem for a few days at least. People have known about his ministry, but this beggar hasn't heard about him. But he responds. He only knows his name at this point. So they said to him, where is he? He said, I don't know. They brought him, who formerly was blind, to the Pharisees, the religious leaders. Now it was a Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. And the Pharisees also asked him again how he had received his sight. And he said to them, he put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Therefore some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath. Now it's interesting how we judge people's walk with the Lord by keeping man-made days or religious holidays. God created the Sabbath, but he said the Sabbath was created for man, not for God. It was created so that man would know that they needed a day of rest. Jesus now comes and fulfills the Sabbath because he now is our rest. We enter into rest in Jesus. But they're so hung up on the religious tradition that they think it's impossible for somebody to actually do anything on the Sabbath that violates the law. They must be from Satan. And so often we run into this kind of thing in religion. And when you grow up in one of the traditional churches, one of the most common ones that, having been a family law attorney, the one that really got to me was the whole approach towards divorce. Divorce is treated like it's an unpardonable sin. So it's a religious tradition that says once people are divorced, they obviously, and not only the Roman Church, but other mainline churches that didn't fall very far from the tree, treat it as though it's an unpardonable sin. And so people cannot receive the sacraments. So wait a minute, you're supposed to be ministering to people. When they need you the most, you reject them because they've been divorced. Now, nowhere in the Bible does it say that's an unpardonable sin. It says God hates divorce, but he hates a lot of other things too that people overlook, that they allow the other things to go by. They forgive the other sins, but divorce locks people in. And so you end up with treating people as though they're second-class citizens. They're not allowed to receive the sacraments. It's the same churches that are teaching that the sacraments are the way you get salvation. So you're really telling these people, because of something that happened in your life, you're not allowed to ever be saved. But you faithfully stay in this church because, we're the source of your salvation, which is sort of ridiculous because when we did Catholic nullities, Pam and I, she was a Protestant, I was still a Catholic at the time. We were doing all these things in Latin, and neither one of us had any idea what we were typing. But we did these Catholic nullities, and every one of them we approved. So, I was supposed to be representing the party, seeking it, and the priest, a good friend of mine, was supposed to be the defender of the bond, supposed to be protecting the sanctity of marriage in the church. And there were times when I thought our roles were reversed. I didn't see any reason to grant it, and they grant it anyway. They grant it for psychological incompatibility or whatever, just like the world does. But the sad part is they put people through years and years of feeling that they were rejected by God, feeling that they didn't have a chance. And then suddenly now we went back and we undid that sin and allowed the people to have that marriage nullified, sometimes as long as 25 years later. So for in one case, the lady had married the first time. She was married like 6 months because she thought she was pregnant. Got divorced. She married this other man. They were married for 25 years, had 7 children, all went to Catholic school, all raised in the Catholic faith, being taught that their parents were living in sin. Now, 25 years later, we granted the nullity of that original marriage. So now all that sin went away. Now the kids could actually honor their parents. But it's so ridiculous. And that's the kind of attitudes that these Pharisees had. If you violate the Sabbath, a particular day under our church law, then you're a sinner. That's it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And you obviously can't be serving the Lord if you're doing that. And it's sort of weird because the way this works out between different faiths, it creates all kinds of problems, which is the very problem that Jesus is dealing with here. They're dealing with the Sabbath as though it's ironclad, and if you violate the Sabbath, then obviously you must be a sinner. You can't obviously be doing the work of the Lord on that day. Others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was a division among them. Some people say, wait a minute, he just did something that's miraculous. How can he be a sinner? They said to the blind man again, what do you say about him because he opened your eyes? He said he's a prophet. So now we're seeing a growth in the man. He said, wait a minute, first I just knew him as a name, Jesus. Now I realize, what he did is miraculous, therefore he must be a prophet. But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight until they called the parents of him who had received his sight. And they asked them, saying, is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? So they're putting the pressure on the parents. Maybe he's lying. The parents, is this really your son? Is he really born blind? His parents answered them and said, we know that this is our son, that he was born blind. But by what means he now sees, we do not know, or who opened his eyes, we do not know. He is of age, ask him, he will speak for himself. His parents said these things because they feared the Jews. Remember, the Jews here always refers to the religious establishment. For the Jews had agreed already that if anyone confessed that he was Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. Now, put out of the synagogue means literally excommunicated. Again, we see that same kind of practice in mainline churches, that if you violate their rules, you'll be excommunicated. You're kicked out of the church. And if you believe that your salvation comes through the church, then you're fearful of this power that they have to kick you out. And of course, the Roman Church has anathema against all the Protestant churches, which they've never removed because of the Protestant Reformation. So all the churches that are not Catholic, despite the fact they talk about all coming together, they have not removed any of those anathemas, claiming that all those people who are not in the Roman Church are going to hell, which they're wrong. But that's the attitude. So excommunication is the weapon they have to keep people in fear to remain within a religion, which is weird. Now, when Pam and I got married in Calvary Chapel, the girl that sang at our wedding had become a born-again believer. Her parents taught Catholic confraternity Christian doctrine. They taught CCD at the Catholic Church. They were the ones that started it at their church up in Lake Arrowhead. They'd done it for 17 years. Their daughter became a born-again believer. She was baptized on Saturday. And the word travels quickly in a mountain. So Sunday morning, when the mother got up, she said, how do we feel about our daughter leaving the Catholic Church, becoming a born-again believer, and joining this other church? Well, they didn't have to wait long for their answer, because when we went to the 11 o'clock Mass that day, their pastor excommunicated the parents because of what their daughter had done, who was an adult. So they're in the same position this couple was in. They got kicked out of the church because their daughter, an adult, became a born-again believer. So some things never change. The same silliness that went on back then actually goes on now. So they got their answer right away, and they joined Calvary Chapel too, and it went well. The pastor got removed 6 months later, and somebody came in that had a little more common sense. But that's the kind of weapon they have over people. They either use excommunication, they use the fact they own the property, so that if people want to change at all, they lose the building if they try to leave. So this is the kind of thing that goes on with religion versus relationship. So this young man is put in this position. His parents say, well, now he's an adult, ask him. We don't want to run the risk of being excommunicated.